everyone, welcome back to another video. And as you can see, I'm joined by a special guest. This is Paul of the Leeds That Podcast. So, Paul, what do you do on the Leeds That Podcast?
So, Leeds That is basically the notion that everything's going great, and then it all goes terribly wrong. And we say it might be a bit of a northern phrase, but we say, Leeds That, as in like typical Leeds. So things such as being top of the league at Christmas and then losing out in the playoff semi-finals, or eventually winning the league by 10 points, but no fans being allowed to actually be there to see it. So that's kind of the thing that got it going. And we're just a bunch of friends who've been going to games for a long time. Three of us went to school together, and we just thought we'd put our thoughts down.
Yeah. So there's quite a lot of young people who want to start a podcast. So what made you start it?
Well, it was literally a case of what one of the lads said. There are a few podcasts out there, and we thought it'd be fun to just have a chat together because it's stuff that we do anyway. And B, it's just something a little bit different. And even if no one ever listened, and I'm not saying we have a ton of listeners, but it's nice for us to just get together and have a chat.
So let's talk more about the Brighton Vs Leeds game. That's why we're here. How do you think you'll go into the game against Brighton?
Same way we go into every game, pretty much. If you're playing Football Manager or something like that, I think they call the tactics gung ho, which is get the ball, keep the ball as much as you can, and run at them. And it won't change that. I know that on paper the FA Cup defeat last weekend looked particularly embarrassing, but it was the same kind of tactics. It's not that he doesn't adapt for the opposition, because he does, but that is the way we play. It's always on the front foot.
So how do you think Leeds have done in their first season in the back in the Premier League?
Well, we're really pleased with it, because the main thing, as you'll know, for any promoted team, which is something that Brighton have done incredibly successfully, is to establish yourself. And anybody who said that their goal was anything other than not being relegated in the first season, and possibly even the second season, if you look at Sheffield United at the moment, their goal this year would have been to kick on, and instead they've got 5 points. So in terms of that objective, we're just shy of the halfway point. And I think most people would have taken the amount of points that we've got on the board at this point in time.
Yeah, you're doing quite well. But as a Brighton fan, who should we fear from Leeds?
Oh, it says, fear. Rafinha, one of our Premier League signings, is a Brazilian winger who we signed for about 17 million from France, who's looks like he could be one of those players who might pass through, actually, because he looks like he's destined for a top club. And if we can't get there in a short space of time, we might miss out. So he's a direct, pacey, attacking, skillful winger who will play on the right and cut in onto his left foot. They attack. All of them attack as a force. So Rodrigo, Pablo Hernandez are the kind of tricky ones that will try and unpick things. Matthias Klich, Polish international, who's one of the players we rested last weekend. Calvin Phillips is out with suspension, so that means that actually at the back there'll be a few tweaks. So I wouldn't say fear, but watch out for.
Okay. Who do you fear from Brighton as a Leeds fan?
I watched the game last night to do a bit of research ahead, because of the way that Manchester City set up. I would have thought that for Brighton, having those two games in succession actually means that it would be a relatively similar way that you might set up, because without Leeds and Manchester City playing relatively similar ways, it's just that Manchester City have a lot more established and probably, I'm trying to avoid saying better players, but similar kind of systems. So what I would have thought Brighton would do is that if they set up similar to how they set up last night, they're just going to hope to have and probably have a lot more joy on the counter attack and find that they would have bigger gaps in behind our defence than they got against Manchester City when they eventually decided to go forwards. So the wingers, the Mopes had decent form, and it's always that thing when you're playing against a former player who's done well for you in Ben White, then you know that they're likely to either have an absolute blinder or disappear entirely. And I think it's more likely to be the blinder because he's a top player and he's clearly moved into a slightly different role. The role he was playing last night is actually what we would call the Calvin Phillips role. So he didn't have to play there too often for Leeds last season, but he's establishing himself fast as a really important player for Brighton.
As you just touched on there, this is obviously Brighton versus Leeds, so why wouldn't we talk about Ben White? Do you think if you still had him, you'd be doing better?
I think one of the things that the media don't pick up on is that the players that we were in a position whereby we wanted to sign Ben White and we were willing to pay 30 million, maybe more than 30 million, but Brighton was within their right. He's their player, didn't want to sell him. Know that realistically in the market, if you keep him for another year, you might be able to get, if he goes on to be the player that he appeared to be, that might double. It might be 60 million from Liverpool or Manchester City at the end of this season or the year after. Yeah. But instead of spending that 30 million on Ben White, we were able to spend slightly more than that on two international centre halves, Robin Koch, who's a German international centre half, and Diego Llorente, who's a Spanish international centre half. So we got what we bought to replace Ben White was theoretically better, certainly more experienced at top level. But what's happened is that they're both out injured, and they've been out injured for the majority of the season. So a lot of our frailties have come from the inability to actually feel we've never had our preferred lineup, which most teams don't, but it's not fair to judge them on replacing Ben White at the moment because we haven't had enough time or games to do that.
So, considering what positions you're out on, or maybe you need to score goals, excluding Ben White, who do you think out of Brighton's squad, who do you think you'd like to sign? Or who do you think you'd need?
Oh, I tell you who I think would make a difference just physically in terms of, at the moment, in terms of shoring things up is Lewis Dunk, because we, and when you said who do you fear, it's quite well reported that we've been vulnerable at set pieces, and so I would fear Lewis Dunk in terms of at both ends of the pitch.
Yeah,
on
and
Saturday.
he's just been on his back to his good form as well, which is
exactly. But the things, I don't know whether this will play into our advantage or not. But having had an extra game away at Manchester City on a Wednesday night, which is the games against Manchester City and the game that you'll play against Leeds, regardless of the score and the result, but because of the amount of running we do and the amount of and the fitness, teams always have out of all the games we've played so far this season, teams have had the game in which they've run the furthest and covered the most distance when they've played against Leeds, and similar to that and Manchester City and when you play against Liverpool. So having already had that game in midweek and having gone to extra time and penalties on Sunday night, that you don't know whether that may have an effect. It certainly has an effect, you can say, on the amount of time that Brighton have had to prepare for the game, because whilst Leeds have had a full week and rested 4 or 5 of the first team players on Sunday for that embarrassing defeat in the Cup, they will have been preparing for Saturday's game, whereas you've had a massive midweek game that they played really well, and probably no one would have really argued if they got a point out of that game against Manchester City. They did really well, just got undone by a moment of brilliance, really.
And finally, what do you think the score will be, and who do you think will score if there are any scorers?
In my head then, I went 3-1 Leeds, and that was just the first thing that came into mind. I think because of the fact that we got beaten so embarrassingly on Sunday, that we'll be well up for it. But and I think Bamford will look to get in and amongst the goals again. So I will say Bamford, Harrison, and Rodrigo. But equally, I think it's the hardest league in the world to predict. I don't think you could, especially this season without fans. It's so tricky, and anything that you do expect. And equally, VAR makes a massive difference. We lost 3-0 at Tottenham, and we still had great numbers. We just they got a penalty that was clearly outside the box, and VAR showed it to be outside the box. Things like that just mean if you're not going down 1-0 in a game on VAR decisions, the whole game will be different. So, yeah, I mean, if Brighton set up like they did last night, they're going to get chances. If it's more open than that, we're going to get chances. So, yeah, excited to see how it'll go. I'm just gutted that we can't go.
Yeah. So yes, guys, that is going to be the video. A big thanks to Paul from the LeedsThat podcast for coming on the channel. His links will be in the description. So I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and up the Albion.